Thanks everybody for joining me today. So as Emily mentioned, I've been a Silicon Valley product leader for the last 17 years in the Bay Area, mostly at early to mid-stage startups. So I started my early career back in 2000 at eBay when eBay was a startup. So I was one of 6 product managers. We had done, and I went back and looked at these numbers, we had done about 400 million in revenue that year. But by the time I left 5 years later, the size of the product organization was 200 people, and we had done over $5 billion in revenue. So it was an incredible time of growth. When I was there, I worked on some very successful products, and I worked on some failed products. And then I've seen that same pattern over and over and over again at like all of the future companies I worked with. But now that I sort of get an opportunity to see sort of a greater swath of companies working at Omidyar, I have a very good feel now for sort of what are the characteristics of what makes a product great, and then what are some of the characteristics that cause products to fail. So I'm going to sort of share with you sort of some of my insights today around how to build great products. If at any time during this talk I'm talking too fast, because I tend to, just raise your hand, just say, can you slow down, can you repeat it? I'm happy to do so, and apologies that my Portuguese is not quite so good, so you'll have to bear with me in English today. Okay, so as I mentioned, I worked on lots of products at eBay. So one of my claims to fame is that I was the product manager over the Buy It Now feature. So everybody here has used eBay in the past? Yeah? And you're familiar with Buy It Now, of course. So I was the product manager that launched the Buy It Now feature. Before that, we were purely auctions, only an auction marketplace. And so it was actually a big successful product. So when we launched, within the first 2 weeks of launch, 60% of all listings had the Buy It Now feature added. And this was remarkable because before that time, anytime we talked to sellers and asked them if they wanted to introduce a fixed price format on eBay, they said, no way in hell. They wanted, they loved auctions. That was why they were there. They loved the gaming element of auctions. They loved the fact that with auctions, they could sort of see their prices bid up. And they just didn't think that fixed price would be good. And so, but yet we launched it. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the story of like what we did to make it so successful at the end of the presentation. But it had huge adoption, it had 40% higher conversion of listings, and it had 98% satisfaction from buyers and sellers, despite the fact that had we asked our customers if they wanted this, they would have said no way in hell. However, I've also, as I mentioned, worked on some failed products, and this was one of my failed products. So we had launched eBay stores, and that even after several months of trying, saw only 5% adoption and very low satisfaction numbers. And so for me, it was like, okay, well, what is it about one product that was so successful, the other one not so successful? I was the product manager. When I launched this, I thought it was hot stuff, and then here it was very humbling to launch a failed product. So I really started to think through like what I did here that was different and what than what I did here. And I'll tell you a little bit more of the story again at the end. But I've seen this pattern over and over and over again, right? So what makes Facebook's newsfeed so successful? What makes Instagram's photo sharing service so successful? Or Slack, if anybody uses Slack, what makes that successful? And yet we also have lots of flame out stories in Silicon Valley. So who here has ever heard of Color or Clinkle? Oh, you guys have heard of it? Okay. So so you guys will know that both of those companies collectively raised over $100 million in venture capital money. So with this big war chest, you'd think that they'd have some success, and yet those products flamed out. Like they got no adoption, no users. This is advancing, so I'll just go back. Okay, so I'll sort of share with you the secrets to success here. But it really is, in my opinion, it's all about building products that customers love. So when I say customer, love, I don't mean just like. I don't mean just like, okay, it's nice, it's fine. Like that they love it, right? That they have to tell their friends all about it, and that that they're sort of almost like a customer or a brand advocate. So here's sort of the 3 ways that I found doesn't guarantee success, but certainly increases your chances of success. So the first is to really first start internally by building a really highly successful product team. And I'll share with you what a highly successful product team looks like. I'd love to hear from you what you think a highly successful product team looks like. But once you have that sort of successful product team sort of formed with the right structure and the right incentives, you then need to have that team get out of the building, right? You've heard that, I'm sure, before, of like, get out of the building and talk to your customers to really develop that key insight around the customer's world and what their pain points are and what their needs are. And then with an understanding of that, of those needs and more about your customer, you go back into the building and then you go through a discovery process to come up with the right solution that meets the underserved needs of the customers. So I'm going to walk you through some examples of each of these and then some stories of companies that have done it really, really well. So before I tell you what I think a high-performing product team looks like, I'd love to hear from you guys. What do you think a high-performing product team looks like? What are some of the characteristics in your mind? Thoughts? Can you speak up a little bit? Sorry. Different backgrounds. Okay, a diverse team. Very diverse team. Great. Empathy. A team that has empathy, right, for their customers and probably for each other. Great. Autonomy, right, so that they get to make their own decisions around what is the right solution. They don't have like the executive team or the founders, right, like just breathing down their back and telling them what to do. That's great. Engaged, okay, yep, so that they're, get engaged with each other and engaged with
the cause, I think.
Okay, mission-driven or purpose-driven, connected to the company and the product. Great. Okay. A huge alignment around, so that they have a clear sort of path and they know where they're going, and they're working sort of towards that. Great. Great, fast experimentation and learning, right? So the ability to move fast and learn and iterate fast. So I think that these are all right. So I've actually, so I'm going to share a couple slides and then a couple stories, and my slides keep advancing, so but that's okay. But no, we'll keep it there. Okay, so I think everything that you guys said is exactly what a great performing product team looks like. I'm going to share a few things. So most of you guys probably have this structure, but let me know if there's anybody in the room who doesn't have this structure. So when I say product team, I don't mean just the product manager. I actually mean a squad that works collaboratively together to solve a problem, right? And so that squad minimum has to have the product manager, the designer, and the engineering sitting together, co-located. And so when I say sitting together, it doesn't mean that you're in the same building, but product management is here, and then engineering is sort of, in the other corner or upstairs, right? They're like co-located. So you want a squad where the product manager sits here, the designer sits here, and then the engineering team sits here, like together, right? So that that's sort of where they're having the rich discussions around sort of key insights, what are they learning, what are they hearing from customers, what's the data showing. So you want them to be co-located. The other thing is that, and this was mentioned before, that you want them to be very empowered to make the decisions. So if you're a founder or CEO out there, and what you're doing is you're giving your product team a list of projects or a roadmap and telling them what to execute against, you're doing it all wrong. And I've seen it, even in Silicon Valley, I do see sort of teams operate that way, right, where it's very much like founder or CEO driven, sort of executing against the roadmap. What you really want to do instead is allow the teams to make decisions based on the data and based on outcomes. So I'll sort of share sort of this next slide, which is launching products is not about, that's not what's successful, right? Like that's not, like oftentimes when I work with product teams, like I'll hear them, oh, we just launched our mobile app last week, and so check, and then they move on to the next feature, right? And they think that that's success, is actually getting things out, out live. But in fact, that's the opposite of success. So success is, did they move the business outcomes, right? And so what you want to do is you want to give the product organization a set of KPIs or objectives, and then allow them through a process of customer discovery and product discovery and product validation to tell you whether, what they should be building, and that they're measured, and that they're held accountable to those objectives. So they're measured on this, on the outcome, right? Did they actually move, whether it's revenue or conversion or engagement? Did they actually move that? So how many of you guys think you're operating in this world today? Yeah? You are? Okay, and then for how many of you guys don't think you're operating in this world today? Okay, and then the rest of you are not so sure. Is that right? Or maybe you think or you want to get here, but you're not quite getting here in practice, right? Is that? So I'll share with you sort of what I think some of the best product teams in Silicon Valley are doing. So so this is sort of the structure that they have. So they have product, right? So product is not just product management. So product includes the whole squad. It could be a product manager, engineer, designer. Sometimes it might be other team members that you bring into the squad because they're critical for providing the data and the inputs around the product. Could be a data scientist, could be sitting with the team. This morning I was with Geeky and we were talking about having an academic person sort of sitting with the team. But that sort of team is sitting together. And you might have different swim lanes, right? And so each product squad could have maybe a focus on a different area of the product, but what they really are given is a set of outcomes, right? So maybe this team is focused on the KPI around user growth. And then this onboarding team is around activation. And then a third team around DAU over MAU stands for daily active user over monthly active user, which is really a measure of engagement, right? But you're giving them a set of outcomes that you want to achieve, right? Like move conversion from 25% to 30% or 35%, and as a founder or a CEO, I might have some ideas and I'll share it with you, but I'm not expecting you guys to implement those ideas blindly. Your job, in fact, is to understand sort of the metrics, move those metrics, and go through a process of customer discovery, and product validation to tell me what we should be building for the company that's going to move those metrics. And that team continues to work on driving that metric until that metric is hit. Any feedback or thoughts around sort of this model or this approach? And for those of you who are operating this model, are you finding it successful? And those who aren't, I'd love to get some feedback. So, question or feedback?
Those product domains are defined by the KPI they're going for.
Yeah. So you can scope a squad around a domain, a user group, however you want to organize your team. That is up to you guys to determine. But each squad should have sort of a KPI, right? And then we were talking about OKRs this morning at Geeky, right? But a KPI that they're responsible for moving. So so you just need to define for each squad what that KPI is. Make sense?
Yeah, so it's the other way around. So you have a focus, for example, on signups, and then you define the KPI.
Yeah, or you could just also define the squad based on the, based on just the metric, and I've seen that too. So when I was running product at Stella and Dot, we had 8 squads. One squad was around mobile, just because mobile was brand new then, but there was a squad around e-commerce conversion. There was a squad around stylists or sellers and sort of signups. And then there was a squad around the core product, which was engagement. So there was a little bit of a hybrid of domain and KPI, but each one, the important thing is that each one is given a set of KPIs, not projects to implement. Okay? Yep.
I have a doubt. When you said at the KPI.
Yep.
But it's not the only metric that you look for. You are looking for in your squad, or is it the only metric you?
They should have, each squad should have one North Star metric, just one, like, because it's too confusing to give them multiple. Then it's like, okay, well, which one are we really optimizing for? You give them one. Now, as they work on specific projects or features, right, like they define the projects and features, each of those projects might have what we call proxy metrics. That like is just like the next level drill down around the metrics. So that's okay to have different set of proxy metrics. But at the end of the day, right, like if there's a quarterly planning or quarterly review, you're evaluating the team on whether they drove that metric sort of up. So this is sort of a key difference that I see in terms of the more successful product teams versus the ones that aren't as successful, which is the more successful ones are just only about the outcomes, whereas the ones that are less successful are all about output, and throughput. But it's a big difference, right? Because you can, and I'll sometimes work with teams in India where they're like, oh, but we're really fast and we ship things really fast, but great, but your metrics aren't moving. So like how can you say that you're successful? So it's just a little bit of a mindset shift. Okay, the next couple sections are really where the meat is. How many of you guys, and I'm sure we'll see a lot of show of hands, but how many of you guys, are going out and talking to your customers and actually having real conversations with them? Okay, most of the people in this room. How many of you guys are doing it every week? That's great. Every day? Every day? That's awesome. Okay. A few times a day.
It could be like
a few times. A few times. Oh, customer support. No. So I don't mean just handling customer support. I'm talking about so before you have to support them, like you're actually going out and you're having, like interviews. You're interviewing your customers. You're talking to your customers. Telephone could count. Telephone every week. And how long are you spending with your customers?
It depends. Maybe 40 minutes.
And what are you asking them?
Everything that comes.
Great. Okay. Yeah. We're great. And I do see that like here in Brazil is that you guys really are very customer centric. But I'm going to share with you a couple of case studies, and this really brings it home. These guys, Sam and Liam. Anybody recognize them? Okay. So yeah. You know Sam and Liam. Okay. All right. So Sam and Liam actually started in the UK and then moved out to the Bay Area. And they wanted to solve a problem, which is they wanted to be in education and, to sort of, their mission was to further education. And they had this idea. And their idea was, okay, well, we're going to build lesson plans for our teachers. And so they're like, okay, well, we're going to create a startup and we're going to build lesson plans for our teachers. But they did something really interesting, which I don't always see founding teams do. Instead of writing a single line of code, what they did was that they went out and they talked to 100 teachers first. They went into the classrooms, they went into the schools, and they talked to 100 teachers first. And Derek, I was having a conversation with you yesterday. You also did that, right? Before you started your startup, you talked to 100 customers, and then decided what to build. And what was really interesting after talking to 100 teachers is that they learned something, and what they learned from their teachers was like lesson plans is fine, but that's not the problem that we're experiencing in the classroom, right? Like that's not going to help us. The problem that we have in the classroom is the culture of the classroom, or sort of managing the students and sort of the behavior. Because what's happening is that in every class, there's 2 or 3 students who are very disruptive, and then they disrupt the classroom environment. And I'm spending the first 20 minutes of the lesson, managing that group instead of sort of furthering, the lesson of the day. And so they're like, that's interesting. We were going to build a company around lesson plans, but what we're hearing is that's not the pain for the teacher. The pain was like the classroom management. So they decided that they were going to build something different, and what they built instead was a positive feedback tool. Positive feedback tool. It's not showing up. It's showing up on mine. So anyway, so they wanted to build a positive feedback tool where, and this was sort of 5 years ago, with the rise of sort of tablets and mobile, they wanted a tool where teachers could actually reward students individually for positive behavior that they saw in the classroom. So if a student was particularly attentive or listening well, it's like, great, Sam, you get listening sort of mark. If another student was demonstrating teamwork or participation, they would get sort of positive marks. And and so they gave the product, they built this product, and they gave it to some of those early teachers that they talked to, and the teachers started using it, and they started seeing results in the classroom, which is, like the kids who used to disrupt the classroom, once they saw that all of these other students were getting positive marks and they weren't, they started shifting their behavior, and then over time, they saw amazing classroom cultures. And then what happened was those teachers started telling other teachers about the product, and those teachers started telling other teachers about the product. So fast forward 5 or 6 years later, the company is Class Dojo. I don't know how many of you guys have heard about Class Dojo here. It launched in 2011, and then these numbers might have been a little bit old. I pulled it from last year, but like last year they had 35 million users using the product, and it was used in today it's used in over 90% of schools, which is incredible, right? And so had they started out building like their original idea, they probably would not have seen this results. What they did instead was they went out and they talked to hundreds of teachers and really understood sort of the pain point, and then built the right product for them. Okay, I'll share with you another example. Okay, so Airbnb. Who hasn't heard of Airbnb? Anybody not heard it? You haven't heard of Airbnb? Oh, okay. So anybody not heard of Airbnb? Okay, so I don't know how many of you guys know the Airbnb story, but so this is Joe, Brian, and I forget the CTO's name, but they were 3 friends. They all went to school together, undergrad. And after undergrad, they decided they were going to start a company together. And they're like, you know what, I have no idea what company we're going to start, and we have no money. And so what they said was like, okay, well, we have no job. We're going to start a company. We don't know what we want to build yet, but we don't know how to pay the rent. They had this apartment in San Francisco, and that was their apartment. They were like, well, we have some extra space, and there's the design conference that's coming into town, and what we understand is all the hotel rooms were booked up, so why don't we just rent out our extra space? In fact, but we don't have any beds, so why don't we blow up some air beds, and offer them breakfast. And so, they created a site. It was called Airbed and Breakfast, and that was where the name Airbnb came from. And they were looking for an idea, and they decided that this was, what they were going to do. Does anybody know what happened in that first year? Does anybody have a guess of what happened in that first year?
Like 50 no's or something like that?
50 no's? Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay, nobody knows the Airbnb story? Okay, so great. Okay, so a lot of people sort of think that Airbnb was an immediate success, right? It's like, brilliant idea. They're going to launch a site. It's going to be amazing in terms of results. And this is what happened in their first year, right? So, they called this, so no traffic, no traffic, no traffic, no traffic, no bookings. They had this blip here. It was the Democratic National Convention. It was like when Obama was running for office for the first time. He spoke at the Democratic National Convention. Same story. They heard that all of the hotel rooms were sold out. They're like, let's go to Denver, I believe it was. Let's try to get a bunch of people to list their rooms, but and then let's get some rooms booked through Airbnb. The reason why there was this spike here was because they contacted all of the local reporters in Denver who started writing up about the site. And then those local reporters, got the word out. And then all of a sudden they got some national press, CNN and NBC and other folks started writing about the site. And then, they saw this happen. They were like, great, we made it. We figured it out. This is awesome. And then what happened, right? So the TechCrunch trough was sorrow. So they got a huge PR blitz, and then after that blitz sort of died down, sort of back to nothing, right? And so they, I'm sure you've heard some of the stories of how like they were selling cereal in order to survive. They sold Obama O's and Captain McCain's in order to survive. So what changed? Does anybody know what changed? Like how they got out of this trough of sorrow? Anybody know? Derek. Talking to users, bingo. Okay, so this is it. That's exactly what happened. So what happened before that was they decided to sign up for Y Combinator. So Y Combinator at the time, and I think everybody knows it now, Y Combinator at the time was still kind of early. It's an accelerator in San Francisco that helps startups, especially in the early years, increase their chances of success. And they signed up for Y Combinator, and this really changed their trajectory, right? So Paul Graham, who sort of started Y Combinator, saw what they were doing. They're like, you know what you guys need to do? You guys aren't sort of focused on the right things. You guys are focused on PR. You guys are focused on marketing to bring people to the site, but it's obviously not working. It hasn't been working for the last year or two. What you really need to do is just focus on 100 users. Don't focus on 1 million users. Don't focus on that. Focus on getting 100 people to absolutely love your product. Because what happens is that when 100 people love your product, they're going to tell their friends, and then those friends who hopefully also love the product are going to tell their friends and going to tell their friends. And so just focus on the 100. And what he said was, go out and talk to your users. Okay, so then they talked to users. And what was interesting, and it's really cool because not only could they talk to users, but they could actually stay in their users' homes, right? Like they could book through Airbnb. So they found out a few things in going out for the first time and not only talking to their users, but living in their homes. So one of the things that they sort of discovered was like, interesting. The photos on our website are really crappy, because they're taken by the host with these terrible cameras, right? And so, even though we're going to visit these apartments and they're gorgeous and they're beautiful and they're in really cool locations, the photos are really terrible. And so they did what's called sort of the concierge approach, or things that just don't scale. And so what they were like, well, what if we took the photos? We hired a professional photographer, and we'd go into these host homes, and we would take professional photos for them. And what they found was that, when they did this, they went from just 10 bookings a day to 20 bookings a day. And they're like, okay, that's interesting. But they kept then going out, living with with the hosts, talking to their users, and they learned a lot of things that they hadn't even thought about before. So one of the things that they learned was trust. Trust was really important. And so they were like, okay, well, if trust is really important, then we need to do things like profiles and identities and reputation. Other thing that they learned was payments was a huge friction, because they stayed at one of their host home and and having this great conversation with the host around the service and around the local culture and everything. And the host was like, okay, but I want you to pay me now. And they were like, oh, that's really awkward, right? And so they're like, okay, wow, we need to introduce payments on the site, even though before we would have never thought that anybody would pay up front for a room. Their mental model was you pay at the very, very end after you've stayed there, right? And so they just sort of learned all of these things that then they started incorporating into their product, right? And so what happened? That's the Airbnb story that we all know. And this isn't a very old graph. This is the one that we've pulled out. But and I'm sure this is again, similar to eBay, hockey stick trajectory. It keeps going up and up and up. But they started doing things, based on sort of the feedback from their users. So, okay, so that was Airbnb, and then, so you guys might have heard about Steve Blank. He wrote. He was part of the early Lean startup movement, and he's famous for saying in a startup, no facts exist inside the building, only opinions, right? And so, the best companies I know go out. And out of the building, they don't just invite customers inside the building. They actually go out, and they really get into the minds of their users, right? They understand their world. They ask about everything about their users. what are they driving? Like, like how do they make certain decisions? Like, who takes care of their kids? They're really getting inside the minds of their users before even starting to talk about product. And so we don't know about our customers. We think we know about our customers, right? But like, we won't really discover what we need to discover unless we go out and talk to them. Okay, so once we go out, any questions on that before I move into the third section? Okay. Okay, so once we go out and talk to our customers, we need to then go back into the building and go through a process that we call product discovery, which is, okay, now that we really understand our users' needs and their underserved needs, what is the solution that we're going to build for them? So before I sort of walk you through some product discovery techniques, this is, I think, something really important to understand, which is at a startup, right? Like, you only have so many resources, you only have so much time, and you only have so much money. And so time here really is your enemy. So if what you're doing is you're just making assumptions about what your users need, and you're sort of building really, really fast, and you're launching something without knowing whether or not it's any good, that's huge opportunity cost. And so you don't want to spend weeks and months building something that might end up not ever getting used, because that was weeks and months of wasted development, right? So time is your enemy. This slide, it keeps advancing, but that's okay. This slide was really interesting. So a couple years ago, I was at a conference, and Tom Shi, who was one of the early leaders of Google X, really educated me and the whole audience around this idea of sort of fast learning, right? So which is, let's just assume, right? Like even the best product leaders, even Steve Jobs, right? Like not all of his ideas were any good, right? Like, he certainly had a lot of failed ideas. Amazon, Jeff Bezos, right? Like, they came out with the phone, right? Like, so not all the ideas are good. So let's just assume, which is this, I think, very real, like only 1 out of 20 ideas are really good, right? Like they're really good. So what happens is that, what if you just try out all of your ideas? If you try out all of your ideas, by the time you try out 20 different things, you've increased your chances of success to 64%, but there's still a 36% chance of failure. If you try out 50 things, you've increased your chances of success, but you've tried out 50 things. So what happens if you're at an early stage startup where you only have 18 months of cash and you've only been able to build 12 things, right? And then none of them really worked. And then you realize, oh crap, I only have 3 months of runway left. And yet, I couldn't really figure out what was the thing that was gonna work. You really run out of luck. And so what we try to do is, instead of having product teams build all of their great ideas, because you can never build all of them, you run all of your ideas through a process that we call product discovery, which is for the problem that you're trying to solve for your user. You might have 100 great ideas around how to solve them. Which are the right ideas? Let's come up with what you think the hypotheses are around the greatest ideas. Take it back out to users through a process called product validation and see if it's any good. So we're going to spend some time talking about the design sprint. So this is my new favorite product discovery method. Last summer I ran a few design sprints with the Geeky team, and Wolney's here, and he can share about his experiences. But I think that they had some tremendous results, which I'll share with you today. Tomorrow I'm going to run a design sprint with a Dr. Consulta team. So one of the great things about being part of a Omidyar portfolio company is that you get some of my help to help you run your first sprints. But this is the idea around the design sprint, right? So the whole notion is that instead of only learning by building things, launching them, and then only getting the data to see if you were on the right track, it's a shortcut to learning where you're ideating, you're talking to your users about the idea, and then you're seeing if it's any good. And only do you take the best ideas into development. So it's a way for you to shortcut the process and learn faster. Okay, so this is sort of the 5 stages of a sprint. So it's typically a 5-day process. I've run shorter sprints, but it's typically a 5-day process. where you generally start on Monday, but you get a cross-functional team together. So in the beginning, I talked about your product squad. You definitely want the product squad in the same room, but you might also invite your founder, your CEO, maybe your marketing leader, maybe your customer support leader. But you bring a cross-functional team together, and you first go through in the morning a process of knowledge sharing. And I'll actually share the different steps. I'll keep this high level, but you get everybody together, you understand the problem, then you come up with the challenge statement that's focused around the user. On day 2, you're going to ideate, and you're going to come up with as many different ideas to solve sort of that user problem as much as possible. On the 3rd day, you're deciding which idea you're going to sort of validate, or you're going to prototype and validate. And so you're going to sort of storyboard it out. On the 4th day, you're going to prototype, and on the 5th day, you're going to go out and you talk to your users. So that's sort of the steps, and I'll go in more detail around it. So I'm going to sort of go in detail by sharing the design sprint that I ran with Geeky Games last summer. So everybody, who's not familiar with Geeky? Does everybody know Geeky? You're not familiar with Geeky? Okay. So I'm going to, do you want to share, or do you want me to share a little bit? Okay. Okay. So Geeky has an or at least Geeky Games. Geeky has a bunch of different products, but I ran a design sprint with the games team. So Geeky Games has an adaptive learning platform for students who are studying for ENEM. Yeah. And so the product sort of learns based on the students' performance and sort of gives them different modules. And one of the things that Geeky had challenges with was a few things. One was low engagement when I was working with the team, like low engagement with the platform. They also had a free product, and they wanted to get more people to start paying for the product. They also didn't necessarily have alignment around where they were going to go with the product. And it was also like a brand new product manager who had just joined the team, right? Emilio had just joined the team. And so I think that the team wasn't quite sure like what they were needing to work on in order to sort of improve some of these outcomes. So really it was the perfect time to sprint. And so what we did was, as I mentioned, we brought together a cross-functional team, and we ran the sprint in a very long day. But here's sort of pictures of the sprint, so you can sort of see it's very cross-functional, it's very collaborative, people were very highly engaged. When we kick off the sprint, so what I usually do as the facilitator is that I have a series of kickoff slides. They're linked from this presentation. I'll send you guys the slides afterwards so you can sort of access them, where I sort of introduce the day for the attendees, because not everybody understands why we're gathering and what the outcomes are. So I kick off the day, and then we go through morning of knowledge sharing and something I call interview the experts. So we have the customer expert talk about sort of the customer needs and pain points. We might have the data expert share with us the analytics, the funnel and sort of where the drop-offs are in the funnel. We might have the founder or the CEO share the business goals and what we're trying to achieve through the product. So we might have different experts that we interview throughout the morning. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a shared knowledge or understanding of the challenges collectively. Because what happens is that knowledge isn't equally distributed, right? Like, so as the business person or the product leader, you might have much more knowledge than the engineer in the room, or who might never have talked with the customer, or might not really understand what the business goals are. And so different folks have different sets of understanding. What you want to do is try to get sort of shared understanding in the room. And when we listen to the experts, then we start taking down notes in the form of a how might we question. And so it's a one question per Post-it note. And so you write HMW, which is how might we at the top. And then when you hear something interesting, you might write it down, but in the form of a question. So for the Airbnb example, and maybe one of the things that the product manager might have said is, hey, I went out and talked to a bunch of customers, and one of the things that they said was that we don't really trust the platform, right? And so you're like, that's interesting. One of the Post-it notes might be, how might we gain trust within the user community? So once we sort of interview the experts, we're taking notes on Post-it notes. At the end of the knowledge sharing morning, we gather all the Post-it notes, and then we have a few different people organize the Post-it notes. And so like they're moving Post-it notes around until like themes emerge, right? Because there's a lot of sort of same themes. And then we label the themes. And so here's an example of the notes and what we labeled. And then once people come back, you can sort of see what the emerging themes are. Then what we'll do is we'll create a customer journey map, where we'll sort of understand who are all of the different users of the system, what is the final outcome that we are trying to have the users sort of achieve, and then what's sort of the journey throughout. And so we'll map out sort of the customer journey, and then we'll sort of define the sprint challenge statement, right? And so the sprint challenge statement, and we actually spent longer than I thought it was going to take us to come up with the sprint challenge statement, because at first it was like, okay, like oftentimes when I work with teams, the initial challenge statements are always about company problems and never about user problems, right? So it's sort of like, oh, like how do we get more, people to move from free to paid, or like how do we get more engagement of the product? And what I think people fail to realize is that like that's fine, that's what we want, but unless you're solving a problem for a user and removing their pain or providing them some benefit, they're never going to do what you want them to do, right? So you really need to get into their shoes, into their mindset around what is their goal, what is their need. And so we write the challenge statement framed from the perspective of the user. And so from Geeky's challenge statement that we came up with was, how might we help students engage with their study plans to best prepare them for the national exam? Okay, so we're going to get to a couple of exercises first. So you're probably wondering why there's things out on the board. So I'm going to run you through a couple of the design sprint exercises. And so one of them is coming up. So after we craft the challenge statement, we want to go through an ideation process, right? So we want to go through a process of diverging and coming up with as many ideas as possible before converging and sort of picking just a few to work on. And so the way we ideate is very similar to how animated film artists like do movies or cartoons. So how many of you have ever seen a Pixar movie? I think all of us. So so the Pixar animated film or animated illustrators will go through the same process that we'll go through, which is they'll all get in a room, they'll sort of brainstorm a bunch of different things, they'll take notes, and then from there they'll sort of start listing out some of the ideas, and then after that, they don't just write the story, they'll sort of start sketching some of those ideas, and then the final journey is to start stitching some of the sketches together, right? And so that's sort of what animated film illustrators do. That's what we do in our sprint. And so and I'm going to walk you guys through one of the exercises today. So it's the Crazy 8 exercise. It's my favorite exercise. So I always use Crazy 8s now for any brainstorming I do. So one of the problems that I find with brainstorming sessions is that people, you have a group of people, they're shouting out ideas and you're writing up on the board, and then people start explaining why the ideas don't work, and you're just spending too much time evaluating the ideas as people are shouting them out. So I don't like group brainstorming anymore. The way I do group brainstorming now, or any type of brainstorming, is I still get people together in a room, but we're going to all ideate, but individually, before we get together. And so I'll often run a Crazy 8 exercise for any brainstorming session. And so what we do is we fold a piece of paper into 8 squares, and we're given 5 minutes to come up with 8 different ideas per square, and we sketch it, right? So we sketch it, we sketch the idea, and then we label each of the ideas with a label before we share it with each other. So we're going to walk through that group exercise today, so get you guys sort of active now.
And before you do
oh, yes.
Raise your hand if you're hot.
Everybody's hot,
Okay.
yeah.
And
We can
raise
open
your
the-
hand if you have an empty seat next to you. Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, everybody grab a seat, because you're going to need a seat, and everybody should have in front of them at least a Sharpie and blank piece of paper. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to take and fold the sheet of paper into 8 squares. Okay, so here's the exercise. If everybody can sort of come back. Okay, so here's the exercise. So, so pretend you are the founders of Airbnb. This was 7 years ago, so forget everything that you know today about the product. And you're going out and you're talking to your hosts and you're talking to renters, and you're trying to understand what their needs are. And one of the things that you've learned is that when these leisure travelers are going out and visiting different cities, they don't really like staying in hotels because it's very sterile, because they don't really feel like they get to experience like the local culture or get to meet people. And so you've developed that insight and you're like, aha, that's interesting, okay. There's a need here and it's being underserved by the solutions in the marketplace today, which is hotels. And so so you come back to the building and you're going to ideate based on the need that you just heard from your users. And the challenge statement I'm going to give you is, how might we get more leisure travelers to experience Brazil local culture through Airbnb? Okay, so that's the challenge statement. I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes. I'm going to time you, and you're going to come up with 8 different ideas. So 8 different ideas, 1 idea per square, and you're going to sketch it. And so again, here's an example of that. Oh, I don't know if that worked. Okay, here's an example of what you're going to do. You're going to sketch each of your ideas, 1 idea per frame, and after you sketch it, you're going to label it. But you have 5 minutes. So this is not about making it perfect. This is about ideation and getting through the exercise fast. So I'll give you guys 5 minutes. Okay, so that was time. Okay, so the next part of the exercise is that each of you, I think, are sitting in tables of either 6 or 7 people. So you're going to either break up into groups of either 3 or 4. And so, pick your group of 3 or 4. And what you're going to do is you're going to review each other's ideas. And each of you should have a set of voting dots in front of you. And if not, let me know. I can grab some voting dots for you. And what you're going to do is you're going to put a dot against any of your favorite ideas. And you can vote on your own, or you can vote on, but you're going to start voting on ideas. And so normally when we do this on a sprint, what we'll do is, we'll have 6 or 8 different people in the room, and we'll hang up our sketches along the walls, and people will go around, and silently read the ideas and vote on their favorites. But since it's a tight space, what we'll do is just silently, so pass the papers, don't explain the ideas. So I don't want to hear any noise in the next 5 minutes. Just share and sort of silently read it and vote on your favorite ideas. So get in groups of 3 or 4, and we'll give you guys 5 minutes. Okay, so what would normally happen now, right, is that we would have a discussion, but we don't have a discussion on all of the ideas. And what we do is we just talk about the ideas that have the most heat. And the most heat is the ones that have the most votes, right? And so that's why I really like brainstorming. So instead of having to debate every idea, any ideas that got no votes, just don't even bother talking about them, right? You might want to just focus on the ideas that have the most votes. And that's how you would run this part of the design sprint exercise. So before I sort of go through the rest of the presentation, I want to hear from maybe 2 or 3 of you guys, like what were some of the best ideas based on the votes? Anybody want to tell me? Raise your hand. What were some of the good, what were some of the, okay. All right, okay, what were some of the best ideas that you saw? Any hands? Juliana.
So if you're saying from...
Everybody focus here.
if you're saying from July 4th to 9th, you receive an agenda of all the events that are going on. Close to
Oh,
your-
okay, a schedule of events.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, schedule events. Yeah. Cooking? Oh, cooking. Yeah. Okay, so reciprocal cooking. Okay, great. Anybody else? Another idea?
You could get some discounts in order to give something back to the community.
Okay.
Work with the community.
Okay, so discounts it's to give something back to the community. Tongay, did you have an idea? Or over here? Okay. So friend suggestions, social suggestions. Okay, great. So anyway, so you guys went through that exercise. Hopefully that was fun. But this is how I run all my brainstorming sessions from here on out. But okay, so what happens is that now, so what was really interesting was that we diverged, right? Like in only 5 minutes, even within your small group, you came up with 24 to 32 different ideas, right? And that was fast. It only took you 5 minutes to come up with those ideas. You would not have come up with 32 ideas had you had a great group brainstorming session. The other thing is that, with another 5 minutes, you were able to quickly narrow in on the best ideas. And so what would happen now is that we'd have a discussion around just those ideas. And then we take whichever of the best ideas that we like, and then we go and we do solution sketches. And so what the solution sketch is, and I'll explain it really at a high level, is that your idea doesn't exist in isolation. The user has to journey through your idea. And so the solution sketch, it shows you where does the user start in the journey, where do they go next, where do they go next. And you're starting to draw out the UI, and then you start to write down notes. And so the next part of the sprint really is to take some of the best ideas that you heard, and then you start to put together a solution sketch of the user journey through those ideas. And then after that, we pick, we'll do a very similar exercise with the solution sketches where we'll share the solution sketches with each other, vote on them, have a discussion, and then we'll pick one of the best solution sketches and we'll really flesh it out. And we'll do this together as a group, and we'll put together the storyboard, right? So it's really just fleshing out the user journey even further, frame by frame, and not miss any detail. So for the geeky example, so taking you guys back to the geeky games example, oops. Okay, I'm gonna use this now. Okay, so with the geeky example, the solution sketch that they chose, that they decided to storyboard, was called Mario's Journey, right? And so everybody here has played Nintendo Mario Kart, right? So you know that if you played Mario Kart, Mario and Luigi are sort of racing through the finish line, and they can see their progression through the journey. And then all along the way, they're collecting gold coins and super boosters, and then they can see where they are in the leaderboard. So very similarly, Geeky Games wanted to add gamification to their study plans so that students could see where they were in their journey, and then as they passed certain modules, they would get rewards, and they could see where they are in the leaderboard. Okay, so then what we did after that was we prototyped the solution. So we created a clickable prototype, and keep in mind this is not code, right? We didn't ask an engineer to write a single line of code. We had the designers sort of work together with the team to put together a prototype of the solution. And then what we did was that we went out and we talked to a bunch of different users. Now, when we talk to users, we want to learn a few things. And I could spend an hour talking about how you do user validation, but I won't have time. But here are the things that we want to learn. So the first thing is, do they even relate to this problem? Is this a problem, like that they even have, and do they relate to it? Can they use it? And this is sort of where usability comes through, right? Like when you give them the prototype, you refrain from showing them how to go through the prototype. What you're doing instead is you're going to give them the prototype, and you're going to watch them as they use it and not lead them along. When they get stuck, you're not going to say, okay, well, click on this button. You're going to just, like have this awkward silence. And if they're still struggling, it's indicative, right? Of like if they're struggling through it, So like maybe it's not usable. And even if they're struggling, you might want to ask them, like, well, what did you think should have happened? Or what did you, or like, if I wasn't here in the room, what would you have done? And they probably would have like, I probably would have just like given up, So it's helpful to hear that feedback. The other thing is, and this is probably the most important question, is do they even find it valuable? So you want to find out, would they actually use this solution? And the way that I like to also ask this question is the NPS question. You guys know about NPS, Net Promoter Score? So the question is, on a scale of 0 to 10, what would you give this solution based on, and would you tell a friend or a colleague about it? And then if they don't give you a 9 or a 10, then you're not onto something yet. So you really want to hear 9s and 10s out of people. And then if they don't give you a 9 or 10, you're going to ask the follow-up question, well, what would it take to get a 9 or a 10? Right? Like, what would it take? Because you want to hear from them, why they're not finding the product super valuable. So we want to go through and we want to do user validation. Unfortunately, I think we ran out of time, so we can't do the group exercise, which was prototyping. But I'll sort of walk you through. So prototype doesn't need to be a prototype based on pixels. The prototype could actually be using things that are in your supply closet today, right? So it could be pen and paper and chopsticks and Velcro and rubber bands. And the exercise that we're not going to have time to do today, but I would agree, maybe during the happy hour or on your own, you can run this exercise with your team. And the exercise is using the Play-Doh. In a time, you time box it. Everybody has to come up with a prototype of how they might design a tool to help a blind person grab a pin from a bowl without getting hurt, right? So the user here is a blind person, and you're going to prototype a tool that will allow them to reach into the bowl and grab that pin without getting hurt. And then what we do, and unfortunately we're running out of time, so I can't walk you guys through this, is that after the prototypes, everybody's coming up with their own prototype, then you share it with each other, and then you're pretending that you're the blind person in the one scenario, where you're getting your colleague's thing, and you're going to sort of test it out, and you're going to get feedback from that person, and give feedback and get feedback around whether the solution was any good. And then you switch roles, right? So it's a really fun exercise. I hope that you guys do it on your own, but it helps really build sort of empathy with your users. Okay. So what happened with Geeky? Anybody know? Don't tell them only. Anybody know what happened? No guesses? All right. So what happened was that Geeky, went out with the prototype, and this is, so Walden, you can sort of let me know if I'm not saying this quite accurately. But the first time that they went out with their prototype, they actually heard from users that they were onto something, but it wasn't quite right, or there was parts of the solution that was confusing. So like, oh, okay, well, we can't build this just yet. It's not exactly what our users need, and so they went back. And then they did another version of the prototype based on the user feedback. And then they went out and they talked to 5 more users. And then it still wasn't quite right. And then they went back, iterated on the prototype. So what they did was they ended up doing 4 rounds of user testing with 20 users and they didn't even give engineering anything to code during this period, right? Because it wasn't the solution yet. But then finally, after the last round of testing, you want to add something?
One of the phenomenon that we saw there was that we were like simplifying and finding out of the bunch of ideas that we tried to synthesize in a single prototype. We started like to remove some of the things that were more confusing the user instead of really adding value.
That's really interesting. So what Walney was saying was that as they were listening to their users, the users had feedback around some parts of the solution just wasn't that valuable, and so they simplified it and they removed it from the prototype, and then there were other parts of the solution that was more valuable but that needed to be improved, and so they spent time improving upon that. But anyway, so finally after the 4th round of testing, this is like verbatim, I mean obviously not translated from Portuguese, but I want the study plan, let me use this now, let me use this, I promise not to tell it. So that was finally, after that fourth round of testing, they were like heard the excitement from students' voices that they didn't hear from that first sort of round of testing. Then what they did was they actually then did a real A/B test, and they compared the new solution against the old solution, and they found that the new solution improved conversion by over 50% from the old solution. And for me, one of the things that was super rewarding was the feedback that I heard from the Geeky team after the sprint, which was, wow, this was some of the best days I've ever had at Geeky. And it's really transformed the way that we work in our culture. And my understanding is that you guys have run dozens and dozens of sprints since then, right? And this is sort of how you guys do product discovery and development now? Okay. Well, so during the happy hour, definitely talk to Wolny. He's now the expert. Okay. So in summary, right, so here's the 3 steps. Build a high-performing team, go out and talk to your users and do customer discovery, and then go and do product discovery. And I love the design sprint, but certainly there's lots of product discovery techniques. But I happen to love the design sprint. Okay, so the eBay case study. So this is really what happened with us, and this is why the Buy It Now feature was much more successful than the eBay Stores feature. So when I was a new product manager, I had no idea like what I was doing. So during the Buy It Now feature, I brought together a cross-functional team to sort of problem solve with me. And we actually went out and we talked to our sellers, and we were asking them, okay, why is it that you're so against Buy It Now? What is it about auctions that you love so much? And we heard that they said things like, we loved the gaming element of auctions. We love the fact that the prices remain really high. We don't want you to destroy that. And so what we did was that when we came back into the building, we started ideating around a bunch of different solutions until we came up with one solution that we really liked, that we validated with users. And the solution that we really liked, you guys probably don't even know about this, because I'm not sure if it even exists anymore. But the first solution of Buy It Now was something that we called internally disappearing Buy It Now. So the way it worked was, a seller had the option of adding a Buy It Now price to the auction, right? And so there was a bid price, and then there was a Buy It Now price. And then the buyer who was interested in the item had the option of either buying it at the Buy It Now price, which was higher, right, like a lot higher, or if they weren't ready to buy it at that price, they could bid on it, and the Buy It Now price would disappear. So it was still a game. And so like sellers were really happy because they like just set their Buy It Now prices really high. They were like, I'll never get this, but if I get this, I'll be happy. If not, like it's still an auction. And buyers who really wanted to make sure that they got it paid that premium. Otherwise, they just bid on the item, and it became an auction. So it was really a fun implementation where like sellers were like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. It preserves the gaming element of auctions, and yet it allows me to still preserve the high prices too. Then, like 3 or 6 months in, when I was given the stores project, I was like, I know what I'm doing. I'm a product manager now. I'm just going to write up the specs, and it just didn't really work out so well. Okay, so this was really the last slide, which is, I know that you guys, all want to be building billion-dollar businesses, and so I hope that you guys use a lot of these techniques. I'm going to send out at the end of this workshop the slides and Net Promoter Score survey. So I'd really love your feedback on this session to see, because I get better when you guys tell me what worked well, and what you would keep about the content or the delivery, and then what things that you would change about the session. So I really hope that you guys will fill out the NPS survey for me. Thank you very much. We're going to sort of move into the happy hour next door. I hope you guys stay and sort of meet each other, and then talk to us, talk to Rafa and Emily, and Renan is here. Say hi, and come talk to me. And if you have any questions around product, I'm here for the next hour or so. Hope you guys learned something today, and I hope you keep in touch with me. I'll send out my contact information too. Thanks.